Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and tap like before you settle in. Sometimes a story needs witnesses to keep it from slipping back into the dark. The necklace was colder than it ought to be, even in summer. I remember its weight on my collarbone, the way one remembers the pressure of a hand that was once kind and later wasn't. It was a thin chain, nothing ostentatious, and the pendant was an oval of cloudy glass with a sliver of hair sealed. Inside, the kind of Victorian keepsake you'd expect to find in a drawer of old letters, not around the neck of a girl learning to fold napkins for Sunday guests. When I first saw it, I was small enough that the hallway mirror only showed my eyes and forehead, a sliced reflection. Behind me, the long clock ticked with its wooden patience, and the bowl of keys on the sideboard held its little metal C. In that house, everything had its sound. The clocks tick, the doors sigh, the keys ring. Even silence had a texture, thick as wool. My mother kept the necklace in a velvet pouch at the very back of her drawer, under slips and kerchiefs and an old christening cap, swaddled as if it were dangerous. I discovered it the way children discover every forbidden thing. Not because I was curious, though I was, but because the drawer stuck one day and I tugged too hard. The pouch slid forward like a secret deciding to be born. Mother had a way of entering rooms without announcing herself, and when I turned with the pouch in my hand, she was already there, the hem of her dress whispering over the floorboards, the smell of pear soap preceding her like a small, clean ghost. "That isn't a toy," she said, and her voice wasn't angry. It wore the same stillness the clock wore when it paused between ticks, a pause that made you lean closer. "It belongs to the women in this family, and it never leaves the house. I thought it was a fairy story, or worse, a household rule invented for the pleasure of prohibition." I asked why, the way children ask, as if why is a key that opens every lock. My mother didn't answer with a tale of curses then. She took the pouch from me, eased open its mouth, and for a moment she held the oval up to the window. Dust turned to gold in the light, and the hair inside the pendant, paler than straw, almost white, seemed to swim like a weed in shallow water. She fastened the chain around her neck quickly, with the ease of someone who had done it in the dark 100 times, then turned her face to the mirror and looked as if she were counting her ribs through her eyes. After a breath, she unclasped it, returned it to velvet, and shut the drawer, quietly, as if the drawer had a pulse she might startle. We kept a photograph of my great-grandmother on the mantel, her hair drawn back severely, as if she were afraid of leaving any part of herself unfastened. They said she drowned, crossing a river that had no business being crossed in spring, that the ice was a liar that year. They found the chain tangled in the reeds, the pendant sunk like a tear. My grandmother, who rarely wasted words on the dead, used to pass the picture and touch the frame with 2 fingers, as if checking for heat. She would not talk about the river, only about the clock that stopped at 2:14 the day it happened, its pendulum stuck mid-swing like a breath held too long. She sent it out to be mended, but it kept its reluctance. After that, it would occasionally pause at strange hours, as if time were a field you had to cross with care. There was also the story of my mother's sister, the aunt I never met, who slipped while carrying laundry down the back stairs. People fall, bones are frail, gravity is a law, so old our bodies obey it even in sleep. My mother never said the word unlucky. She said nothing at all. But I watched her on washing days, saw how she took the front stairs, how she scooped the laundry basket closer to her heart as if it were a child, how she would not wear even a bracelet then. When the light struck the sideboard keys, she would blink as if the gleam had cut her, and she would smooth her apron as one might smooth the fur of an animal that might bite. I was 13 the first time I wore the necklace, and that was an accident. We were preparing for visitors, and I had been sent to fetch the good napkins from the drawer below the one with secrets. A strand of my hair, black as the inside of the hall closet in those days, had escaped its pin and fallen into my eyes. I tucked it back, and my hand brushed the velvet again. I do not claim innocence. My fingers knew what they were reaching for before my mind admitted the reach. I wanted, more than anything, to see myself as my mother had looked, she who moved through our house like a shadow that was half light. The clasp was finicky and bit my nail. The chain smelled faintly of iron, though it was not iron. When I lifted my eyes to the mirror, the girl in it was older. Older, not like birthdays, but like someone who had waited at a window too many winters for someone who did not come. I stood that way through 3 ticks and the pause between them, listening to the clock consider its next breath. In the yard, someone laughed. It was a bright sound, and then it wasn't. The brightness left the air like a bird that changed its mind mid-flight. I didn't hear the crash so much as feel it, the plates stacked on the kitchen table shivering against one another as if they were thin, nervous teeth. I took the necklace off so fast I scratched my throat. Later, we learned our neighbor's boy had fallen from the plum tree, the same tree we stole fruit from in the late August, and broken his arm in 2 places. Just an accident. Boys climb trees. Branches don't always hold. Still, when my mother saw the faint reddened crescent the chain had left, she took me by the shoulders and shook me once, gently, as if to rattle loose whatever thing had lodged there unseen. She did not ask whether I'd worn it. She went to the hallway, lifted the bowl, and shuffled the keys in her hands until their clinking made a little storm. Then she carried the bowl into her bedroom and hid it too. That evening, she told me what I had demanded when I was smaller, but had not been given. Not curse. She never said that. She said burden. She said charge. She said we keep it, and it keeps us, though from what she could not say. Every woman who wears it carries a story to its end, she said. Some stories end softly. Some end like a glass falling from a table you don't see has been bumped. She held my chin between her thumb and forefinger and turned my face as if searching for a better angle. It will be yours one day, she said, and I felt both named and sentenced. I tried to forget it then. I tried to be a girl who could be trusted near drawers. I learned the sounds of our house in new ways, collected them like charms against the other thing. The back door had 2 hinges that sang in 2 keys. If you opened it slow enough, you could blend them into a single note that felt almost like mercy. The clock's face had a hairline crack that ran from the 12 to the 2, like a tiny bolt of lightning arrested mid-fall. The spoon my mother used to stir tea tapped 3 times against the cup. Sugar, stir, sip. When my father came home, when he still came home, his key rattled different from all others, a heavier sound, as if responsibility itself made noise. He was not a cruel man, but he was a tired one, and tiredness has its sharp edges. He would look at us as if we were questions he did not have the language to answer. On my 17th birthday, in a house crowded with women's breath and cake steam, my mother gave me the velvet pouch, as if it were something ordinary, like a recipe, or the good silver fork with the small dent in its handle. "You'll need to keep it somewhere that is yours," she said, "and you'll need to decide when to wear it and when to let it sleep." My friends wore rhinestones and strings of beads that slid over their collarbones like water. I wore that oval of hair and glass, and it lay there like a resting eye. People said I looked elegant. The word felt like a dress that pinches the ribs. I did not wear it to school. I kept it in the jewelry box my father made me when I was 10, with a carved lid of vines and 2 doves. I kept the key to that box on a ribbon at the back of my wardrobe, because keys that are seen ask to be used. Sometimes at night I would hear the clock stop. It made a silence more present than noise. In that silence, I would think of great-grandmother's hands clawing through reeds, of my aunt's basket tumbling with her, shirts and sheets briefly weightless. I would recite the names of the people in our street as if calling roll could comfort me. Mr. Hart with his bare head and hat always in his hand. Mrs. Peterson, who left cat food for strays in little ceramic bowls. The neighbor boy with the healed arm and the plum tree that kept on giving. And then the clock would find its courage again, and I could sleep. I wore the necklace for the first time as a woman on the day my mother began to lose words. She was not yet 50, but language loosened in her like a thread pulled too far from a hem. Names slid off plates and buttered the floor. Sentences fell apart into their bones. She sat at the table with the sugar bowl in front of her and called it a little white winter, then laughed at herself and pressed her fingers against her temple as if to pin the runaway word. That morning, I fastened the chain while the kettle boiled and made us both tea. I wasn't thinking of burdens or charges. I was thinking of her hair, how it had gone from dark to a gray so soft it was almost luminous, like the hair trapped forever inside the glass I wore. I thought perhaps it would anchor her, this stubborn thing that had tied our women to their own endings. Perhaps, I thought, it could tie her to a beginning again. She was washing apples at the sink. She held one up, water pinstriping the red, and she said, "Your grandmother loved..." Then stopped. She frowned at the apple as if the word might be etched in its skin. She turned to me and looked down at the chain. I cannot say whether what moved over her face was fear or recognition. Perhaps those are twin sisters, holding hands. "Take it off," she whispered. "Not today." And then, as if the world had been listening for its cue, the porch rail gave a long arthritic creak, and a jar on the pantry shelf cracked itself neatly in two. I have told myself since that the humidity did it, that glass ages as we do and grows brittle. But when I unclasped the chain, the kettle stopped its little song mid-whistle, and we stood there with our tea cooling and did not speak of the way a house can become a map of your superstitions. When my mother's words grew sparser, my father began to hum as he moved through the rooms, a tuneless humming that put a gauze over the sounds I knew. Humming is a key that opens no door. He fussed with the clock and finally stopped it on purpose, as if stillness were easier to manage than anticipation. He put the bowl of keys away because he liked a clean surface, and the sideboard stood bald and shining. I told myself this was kindness. When you have learned to live with a sense of omen, ordinary tidying feels like a kind of betrayal. I wore the necklace for 3 days in a row then, to prove to myself that it was only glass and hair and a thin gold thread of metal, and on the 4th day I took the bus into town with it hidden beneath my blouse and bought a dress that did not need it. That evening the bus skidded on wet leaves and kissed the ditch, and no one was badly hurt, but a woman screamed the way people scream when the world suddenly refuses to honor its bargains. I threw up afterward, though I was not the one who had fallen. If you're still here with me, a quiet subscribe, a small comment, even a gentle like helps the story keep breathing. I tried then to make a covenant with the necklace, an agreement like you might make with a fickle god. I would wear it only at thresholds, birthdays, first days of work, the afternoon I met the man who would become my husband. I left it asleep. I wanted to be free of the weight on my collarbone, to feel the air touch skin that had remembered cold. He had eyes the color of the brown bottles in the apothecary window, warm even when light did not pass through them, and a way of listening that made every word feel like a marble. He rolled between his fingers before putting it in a pocket. When I first brought him home, my mother, halfway through a sentence that had forgotten its end, stood and put the kettle on, and then sat again without having poured the water. He said to her, "I'll help," and took the kettle and did not make a ceremony of it. He didn't look at the necklace drawer. He didn't ask about the covered photograph, the absence of the clock's breathing. He took off his shoes at the door, placed them beneath the sideboard, as if they were boats drawn up from a rough shore, and smiled at me in a way that made space in the room. I told him about the necklace only after the night we walked home, under a sky with a single star stubbornly refusing to be swallowed by the city's glow. I had not worn it for months. Courage is a kind of jewelry too. You wear it until your skin warms it, and then you forget it is there until you need to pawn it for some other virtue. I told him the stories as I had them, not wrapped in superstition, not stripped of it either. He listened with the same attention he gave to the ticking of other people's watches, the quiet speech of machine hearts. He said, "Every family carries something that believes it is a god." He took my hand and touched the place on my neck where the chain had laid so often it had drawn a faint line, as if time had signed its name there. "You don't have to worship it," he said. When we married, I did not wear the necklace. My mother sat in the front pew, her hair like haloed smoke, and held a small bouquet of peonies that kept shedding their petals as if they weren't sure this was the right occasion for beauty. After the vows, when we took photographs in the yard, the neighbor boy, no longer a boy, his arm strong, his other arm around a laughing girl, climbed the plum tree and shook down a rain of fruit on us. The purple stains on my hem looked like bruises on snow. Someone found the old clock key in a drawer and tried to wake the clock, but it coughed once and refused, the way old things defend their dignity. The first time I put the necklace on after the wedding, the cat left and did not return. He was a mean old cat with a scar through one ear and a penchant for stealing the cream, and I had often wished him a softer temper, but when a living thing leaves, it is its leaving that shapes the air. I took the chain off and placed it on the bedside table, then picked it up again and locked it in the jewelry box. I tied the little key to the leg of the bed with a piece of string no longer than my palm. I thought of my mother's words charge. Keep and felt the quiet rising like water in my throat. We moved to a small apartment where the windows made squares of light on the floor that kept their edges all afternoon, like promises in good weather. I kept the necklace in a sock at the back of the freezer because I had read somewhere that cold could slow certain things. My husband laughed when he found it nestled between packages of peas, but he didn't ask me to move it. That winter, the street door stuck so often that our neighbors took to leaving it unlatched, and the stairwell smelled of everyone's dinners. The front lock had a trick to it. Turn left, not right, then a small nudge upward, as if persuading a stubborn child to climb. Keys, mirrors, clocks. I kept my trinity even there, in a place built without our family's ghosts. There was a small mirror over the sink that threw back a version of my face slightly too narrow, as if life were already paring me down to what I would need for later years. I could live with that. We can live with so many strange versions of ourselves. When I learned I was carrying a child, I put the necklace on and lay still in the blue before dawn, listening to the faint shushing that might have been blood, or the pipes, or a prayer. I had not asked the pendant for anything. I didn't know how one asked such a thing. I only knew that every woman before me had held it at her throat at least once, while she was more than one person. My mother's words were holes in a net by then, but when I told her, she touched my belly and then touched the place where the necklace would have been if I'd worn it to her house, her finger hovering over skin that remembered everything before I did. She said, "My mother," and then stopped. She looked at the old clock and laughed without sound. I will tell you that the child came small and early and with a cry that sounded like the hinge of our back door on a damp day. I will tell you that she was a stubborn star and learned to sleep only when the city's glow finally gave up. I will tell you that on the night we brought her home, the hallway bulb flickered in a way that made shadows step out from where they had been hiding, and I could not decide if I was more afraid of what I could see or what I couldn't. I will tell you that I slipped the chain over my head and stood in the bathroom with the mirror fogged, and in the oval of glass I carried a sliver of hair that was not mine, and I wondered if curses are only stories we write on places that hurt, so we can bear to touch them. When she was 3 months old, I went to hang a small dress yellow as a lemon dropped in snow, and the rod in the wardrobe collapsed with a sigh, and the dresses fell in a heap like fainting ladies. I laughed then. I laughed because sometimes collapse is just collapse, because rods are cheap and screws loosen themselves like excuses. I laughed until I saw the jewelry box tipped over in the mess. Its lid open. The velvet pouch escaped and tumbled like a little animal finding its feet. I picked it up, and for a moment, the house was so quiet I could hear the tiny clicks of cooling wood, the little breaths that furniture takes when no one is watching. I knew then, as surely as I knew the smell of my daughter's neck, that I could not keep living with the chain hidden and living. I would have to choose to destroy it or to carry it, as one carries an old scar. Visible, yes, but not sovereign. I tried to cut it. Scissors slid off its logic. I tried to burn it, the way people say hair burns, with a smell like morning. But the flame only licked the pendant and left a kiss of soot. I tried to bury it in the planter where our begonia made its frank red mouths, but in the morning the soil was neatly overturned, as if an animal with clean paws had done a courteous job of returning contraband. I placed it on the windowsill and told it, out loud because sometimes words need air, that I would wear it only when I needed to be more than ordinary strong. I told it I would not let it write my days for me. I told it I had other keys now. A crib latch that clicked like a polite throat clearing, a stroller brake that bit down with perfect teeth, a tiny silver rattle shaped like a moon. That night, the clock in my head, because we carry them inside us when the old ones stop, paused at 2:14, and I put my hand over my heart, as if to keep something in or out. I could not tell which. And the city exhaled, and I waited for the sound of glass or the sound of water or the soft sound something makes when it decides not to fall, and I waited, breath tight in my chest, as if the air itself might shatter if I exhaled. My daughter stirred in her cradle, made a small whimper that was closer to music than to crying, and I knew the moment had passed. Nothing had fallen. No jar had cracked, no neighbor had slipped, no clock had lost its nerve. Only the silence stayed, deep as the bottom of a well. I touched the necklace where it lay on the windowsill, faintly warm now, as though it had drunk from my thoughts. I turned away and left it there overnight, daring it to act without me. In the morning, the glass oval was cool again. Pale hair caught inside it like a sunbeam that had gone brittle. Life moved on, though life with a child moves in spirals rather than lines. Days blurred into nights, nights into dawns that looked too much like the ones before. The chain lay in my jewelry box, in the freezer, under folded towels, wherever I hid it. It followed me in my mind. Sometimes, when the light hit just right, I thought I saw a reflection that wasn't mine in the bathroom mirror, a face older, drawn thin by waiting. It was only a trick of tiredness, I told myself. But I began to close the door when I washed, unwilling to risk the stare of something that might know my name. One evening, as my husband read the newspaper in his soft, distracted way, my daughter reached for the jewelry box key tied beneath the bed. Her tiny fingers pulled at the string until it snapped, and the key fell with a bright little ping against the floor. She laughed her laugh, high and startling, like a bird calling from behind a wall. I felt my stomach tighten, as if a hand had clenched inside me. I snatched the key away, too fast, and she cried, confused by the sudden coldness of my gesture. My husband looked up, startled, but said nothing. Silence can be a greater distance than miles. It was then I realized I could not keep pretending. The necklace was not only mine, it had already touched my child's life, even if only by the sound of a falling key. The stories, the accidents, the weight, I could not be certain they belonged to the chain. Yet I could not be certain they did not. And uncertainty is its own kind of curse. I thought of my great-grandmother drowning with the oval pressed against her throat. I thought of my mother's sister, who had folded with the laundry. I thought of my own mother, words dropping from her hands like pearls with no string. How many women had whispered to themselves, "It may be coincidence," while something inside them already knew. I decided I would test it, but carefully. On the day of my daughter's baptism, I slipped it over my neck beneath my dress. I told no one. The church smelled of wax and lilies, the priest's voice echoing in a hollow rhythm against stone. As he poured water over my child's head, she blinked and made a small sound, more of curiosity than complaint. No accidents came, no glasses broke, no sudden silences fell. Only the steady murmur of prayers, the shuffle of feet, the polite clearing of throats. I felt a wash of relief so deep I nearly wept. Perhaps I thought the necklace required fear to feed it, and perhaps, if I refused to fear, it would lose its teeth. But later that day, as guests clinked glasses in our little apartment, I stepped into the kitchen to fetch more bread. The cupboard shelf gave way without warning, and the jars cascaded down like an avalanche of glass and sugar. One jar burst at my feet, and a shard sliced the soft arch of my instep. I bled into the flour dust until the linoleum looked like winter marred by a fox's trail. They said it was the weight of too many jars, a simple matter of nails giving out. But as I pressed a rag against my wound, I felt the chain cold against my throat, and I knew it had only been waiting to remind me. Do you hear me still? If you are listening this far, leave a small sign, a comment, a like, a quiet word, so I know these memories do not vanish alone. As years went by, the necklace became less a jewel and more a weather pattern, one I checked in my mind each morning. Some days I wore it boldly, daring fate to show its hand. Some days I locked it deep away and avoided mirrors. Yet always I returned. Its absence felt as sharp as its presence. It was as though my life had been braided with it, strand by strand, and pulling it loose would unmake me. My husband aged beside me, his hair thinning, his shoulders bowing from work, and he never asked again about the chain. But sometimes I caught him glancing at the jewelry box when he thought I wasn't looking, as if he feared not the necklace itself, but the way it claimed me. When my daughter grew old enough to ask about the velvet pouch, I froze. Her hands were curious the way mine once were, nimble and fearless. She held it up with shining eyes and said, "Mama, may I wear this when I am big?" The air seemed to collapse around me. I heard the long breath of the old clock in my memory, though the clock itself was long gone. I told her simply, "Not yet. It belongs to the women, but only when they are ready." She accepted this, but children remember what adults tried to soften. I saw the shape of the chain reflected in her gaze long after she had put it down. The years wound themselves tighter, like a string pulled slowly through cloth. My mother passed. Her words scattered into silence long before her body followed. My daughter grew tall, her laughter becoming rarer, her eyes carrying secrets of her own. I kept the necklace hidden but not destroyed, and sometimes, in the deep night when the city was hushed and even the pipes seemed to rest, I would rise, put it on, and stand in the mirror. Not to tempt fate, not to summon disaster, but to remind myself that I was still here, still alive, despite every shadow the chain had laid across our family. And yet, as I near the end of my telling, I wonder if surviving is the truest curse of all. Each tragedy, each silence, each cut of glass has left me standing, bearing the weight while others fell. Perhaps the necklace never killed. It only chose its witnesses. And I, stubborn, fearful, and faithful, have carried its gaze longer than I should. If you have stayed to listen, don't let me vanish unheard. Subscribe, leave your word, and share the burden with me. The story is still not done, for my daughter has children now, and I have yet to decide whether the velvet pouch will pass to her, or whether I will take its secret with me to the grave, locking it where no hand, no key, no mirror can find it again. The chain lies beside me now, colder than winter glass, waiting. The clock in the hall, an heirloom that outlived its silence, ticks with deliberate patience. And I ask myself, is the curse in the necklace, or is it only in the way we choose to believe? The answer hovers, unsaid, like a shadow on the other side of the mirror. The answer never came, of course. It hovered like breath on a cold pane, faded, returned, and left only the faintest crescent where I had leaned my forehead against the mirror. Morning crept in with its thin gray light, the kind that makes every surface look honest. I made porridge that tasted of nothing and everything, salt, small warmth, the tired sweetness of a spoon left too long in the pot. I kept moving because movement has always been the cheapest key to a locked room inside the chest. My granddaughter arrived later, hair the pale color of straw washed too often, a small sun that did not scorch. She toddled to the hallway and reached up for the old hand mirror with the foxed glass. Children go to mirrors as moths go to light. They want to see the spark the world insists they carry. She tipped it, and, as if the house had been waiting for a cue, the mirror's silvering caught and made my face into islands. "Look, Oma," she said, pressing her nose to the glass, her breath fogging into a small cloud that erased us both. In that blur, I saw the pendant as it had lain on my windowsill, still and watchful. And I saw the hair white as an apology no one made, and the curve of the glass like a cry stilled by logic. "Gentle," I told her, taking the mirror from her hands and lowering it to her height, so we could both be ruined together. She pointed then at the bowl on the sideboard, the old bowl that had found its way back from cupboards and under beds, now brimming with keys again. Brass? Nickel. One iron thing, so old it was mostly memory. She dipped her small hand in and made them sing. A metal C. I thought of all the doors they once owned and all the rooms that had forgotten them. That afternoon, while she napped with her hands open like someone expecting rain, I fetched the velvet pouch and sat at the table where the light made a bright stripe across the wood. I turned the pendant over and over, the clasp, the tiny hinge, the hair's crescent. Then my finger caught on something I had not felt before, the faintest burr along the bezel. I pressed it. The rim eased a hair's breadth, not enough to open, but enough to promise there was a seam I had not known. A seam implies a tool. A tool implies a key. I looked at the bowl and felt ridiculous. What key opens sorrow? But ridiculousness has never stopped a woman in my family from trying. I fed the keys through my fingers, one by one, listening to their tiny histories. Some were domestic door, cellar, the little garden gate that pinched skin if you weren't careful. Some belonged to another life entirely. a filing cabinet from the office where my husband had once kept patient folders that smelled of chalk and tiredness, a suitcase lock, its handle long lost. At the bottom, pressed flat by years of heavier metal, I found a slender thing, like a needle with a handle. Hardly a key at all. It fit the tiny slot beneath the pendant's hinge the way a word fits a mouth that has been waiting to say it. When the back eased open, the house seemed to lean closer. Inside, lined against the glass like pressed flowers, was not only hair. There was also a paper coil the size of a fingernail, stained the color of tea. I shook it gently into my palm. It unfurled with the stubbornness of old things and showed a line of cramped script, the ink brown to a whisper. Not a confession, not a spell. A date, 14th of March, 1891, and beneath it, we keep her with us that we do not forget. No name, no curse, only the instruction to remember. We keep her with us that we do not forget. I held the oval to the window, and the winter light made the hair luminous, each strand a stubborn desecration of forgetting. I thought of the stories I had been given, accidents, slips, rivers that took what they were offered. I thought of what had never been said at all, of how women in our family had carried all the dead, the way a person carries a secret, that careful crookedness of posture, that ready apology in the shoulders. If the pendant was a curse, it was perhaps the curse of witness. I returned the paper to its glass mouth and closed it with hands that shook. Then I climbed the small stool and took the old clock down from the wall. It had not run in years. We had allowed it its stubbornness. My husband had hung it out of loyalty, a portrait of time rather than time itself. The back panel slid free with a sigh that released a smell like old varnish and meadow hay. Inside, besides the drunken pendulum and the brass wheels that had once taught the house its heartbeat, lay a folded oilcloth packet no bigger than my palm. Someone had tucked it there with the tenderness of hiding bread during a hunger. I opened it expecting perhaps a repair receipt, a diagram of gears. Instead, I found 3 folded pages and a photograph, the sort that eats the edges of faces and leaves only the intent behind them. 4 women stood in a line, their hair pulled back, their hands empty, but held as if carrying something too heavy to show. On the reverse, in the same cramped script, "We keep each other." The pages were a letter written in that same year, 1891, from a woman named L. No surname, only an initial, as if even paper might betray her. She wrote of a sister who had disappeared into a man's hands and was returned to them only as a rumor, of a child who arrived without a father's name and left this world in winter. She wrote of a town where water closed over mouths that said too much. She wrote that they would not forget, that they would hold a lock of the lost and pass it from throat to throat like a vow, and that whenever it lay against a woman's skin, that woman would be unable to avert her gaze from the harm done in her sight. What if it had never been a charm to ward off misfortune, nor a magnet to attract it, but a bridle on our cowardice, a way to compel us to witness, so that we did not call accident what was cruelty, nor silence what was fear. I sat at the table until the light moved to the far wall and the house drew up its darkness like a shawl. When my granddaughter woke and called my name with her little rattle of syllables, I put the clock back and the papers with it, leaving the panel ajar as if the house itself needed air. I did not tell my husband that night. He had spent the day stooped over a radio that refused to find stations, the kind of dignified failure that reminds a man of his limits. He touched the small bruise on my instep, the one a jar's tooth had left months ago, and asked if it still pained me. I lied and said no. Pain is loyal. It does not like to be dismissed in company. Do you remain with me? Leave a small trace, one soft word, one pressed heart, so I know these names do not fall into the well without echo. The next morning, I called my daughter and asked her to come alone, without the children. She arrived with a scarf wrapped twice around her throat, and that quick step grief gives to those who have learned they cannot outrun it. I made tea we did not drink. I placed the pendant and the photograph and the letter on the table between us, as if laying out a body for washing. She did not touch them. She looked at me instead, and I saw in her face both my mother and the women in the picture. The determination that curled the corners of the mouth down, the light perched in the eyes corner as if ready to flee. I thought it was a curse, I said. I think it is a promise. I told her what I had read, what I thought it meant. As I spoke, the house shifted. It wasn't a creak or a knock. It was the felt change of a place that has been waiting for a door to be opened. She listened the way a person listens for a diagnosis they already suspect. When I finished, she reached for the photograph first. She turned it over, ran her finger over the words as if ink were raised like Braille. Then why, she said slowly, did so much break when we wore it? Because, I said, and I felt the answer root as I said it. Because carrying witness makes everything fragile. Because once you see, you cannot unsee. You notice the weak shelf, the rotting stare, the way he puts his hand on your shoulder too hard. You call things by their names. The world answers back. It doesn't like to be named. She smiled then, a brief thing like a knife flashing in sunlight. And you? Did you name them? She meant the men, yes, and also the silences. Not enough, I said. I am telling you now. Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with that sharp bright that is halfway to anger. Then it is mine to name, she said, and in that moment I was both terrified and relieved. To give a daughter a key you cannot guarantee will only open the safe doors is its own kind of agony. We spent the afternoon going through drawers. Not because we expected to find more letters, but because rummaging is the first ritual of a new truth. We found lint and foreign coins that had lost their countries, elastic bands gone brittle, and at the bottom of a lady's glove box, a small silver locket shaped like a heart, too obvious, too sentimental. It was empty. I put it into my daughter's palm. For your girl, I said. Something that tells her love does not always have to ache. When the dusk came, she stood, folded the letter carefully, and tucked it back where I had found it. She arranged the bowl of keys the way I did, with the iron one on top, a small, ridiculous altar. Then she took the necklace and held it to her throat, but did not fasten it. I will not wear it for luck, she said. I will wear it to remember that luck has never belonged to women like us. That night, sleep came the way a kind visitor comes, late but bearing bread. I woke before dawn to the phone ringing with that urgent insistence that teaches the heart to grab its coat. My daughter's voice, steady and far away, told me what had happened. A car had run a light. The metal had knelt. She was unhurt. The children, at home in their beds. The other driver drunk, full of apologies that did not change anything. I wasn't wearing it, she said, half a laugh, half a dare. I left it on the mantel after I fed the cat. Then the world is profligate, I said. It breaks what it wants. We name it anyway. After I hung up, I went to the clock and opened its back. I took the letter out and read it again, slower this time, listening for what it asked. We keep her with us that we do not forget. We keep each other. There was no instruction to pass the pendant. There was only the instruction to refuse forgetting. Maybe the object had become a crutch. Maybe the vow could live without a chain. The next Sunday, I baked bread. I invited the women from our street new mothers with hair still braided like girls, wives with gold bands that bit into their fingers, widows who still slept on one side of the bed. I set the pendant in the middle of the table, not as food, but as a stone one walks around on a path. We ate. We talked about nothing because nothing is the wrapping paper of everything. Later, when laughter had warmed the corners of the room, I told them one story. The river, the back stairs, the jar that split itself neat as a decision. I said the word harm. I said the word hands. I did not say names. Their faces told me which names they were already saying inside. One by one, they told stories back, not to match me, but to be in the same weather. A Bruce explained away by a cupboard door, a son whose rage did not care about the accuracy of its target, a boss who kept a hand on a shoulder too long, pressing until the bone learned his language. No one cried. We do not often cry while building scaffolding. When they left, two of them touched the pendant's glass gently with the backs of their knuckles, as if greeting an old grief without waking it. Are you still with me? If so, leave me the lightest sign, your quiet thumbprint, on this page. So these women know their words traveled farther than the kitchen where we dared to speak. I slept that night with the chain under my pillow. Old instincts survive even as we cut their hair. At dawn, I took it to the river. Not the river of my great-grandmother. Hers had been a broad beast with ice in its teeth. But the smaller river that threads our city, looping under bridges like a seam, no one can quite pull straight. I stood where the bank gave way to gravel and winter weeds, and I spoke aloud the names of the women I could name. Names thicken the air. You can breathe them, and some stray part of a person far away will feel their lungs catch. I did not throw the pendant. I am not so proud as to pretend I could. Instead, I opened its back with a needle key and coaxed the hair and the paper coil into my palm. I tucked the hair into the river's slow mouth and watched it drift like a pale fish until the water took it whole. I pressed the paper to my lips and then slid it under a flat stone at the water's edge, a small archive the river could overhear. The empty glass and gold I returned to the velvet, not because it deserved keeping, but because I am an old woman, and old women understand that some vessels endure because they have been taught to. At home, I unscrewed the mirror from above the bathroom sink. Behind the glass, the backing was mottled with the slow disease of silver. With the same needle key I used to open the pendant, I scratched the words the letter had given me onto the brown paper there. We keep each other. My hand shook. The words leaned. Good. I rehung the mirror and saw my face bent around the letters trapped behind it. Every morning since, I have washed in that sentence. It holds. I wrote a will. Not the kind with houses and accounts. Those will be sorted by people who understand numbers better than I ever did. I wrote a will of instructions. The pendant, empty, to be placed inside the old clock. The clock, to be mounted and kept, running or not, in a hallway where people pass and cannot help but notice their own faces in its glass and ask, briefly, what time is doing to them. The needle key, to remain in the bowl, among all the other ridiculous instruments we keep against a world that breaks what it wants. I have not yet told my daughter what I did at the river. Some things we let our children discover, not because we are coy, but because discovery is a country they must enter with their own feet. She visits with the children. We eat noodles. The smallest falls asleep with a fist around my sweater. Before they leave, my daughter sometimes stands at the clock and adjusts its hands, though it does not know how to be persuaded anymore. It will learn again, she says. Everything does. And still, some nights I feel the tug to fasten the empty pendant at my throat, to feel the oval press, that strange polite pressure against the skin where the words, Woman and witness have shared the same address so long they have lost track of the lease. I do not. I go to the bathroom instead, turn on the light that hums, and catch myself in the mirror. If I look hard, if I lean close so that my breath fogs the surface and then clears, I can see the faint ridges of my scratching behind the glass. We keep each other. I say it aloud to be sure the house hears. Sometimes the clock in the hall, out of habit, answers with a single tick, as if it remembers the choreography of comfort. On mornings when the children come, I put the bowl of keys on the floor and let them finger the metal C. I tell them the stories of what keys can do: open, close, sing, pretend to be useful when they are only sentimental. My granddaughter holds the needle key up like a tiny sword. For fairies, she says, because childhood is audacious. I say yes, because I will not be the one to teach her the limits of her own magic. I keep my limits to myself. Listen, if you can hear me, leave your faintest footprint here. It matters to know a story walked past your door and you did not turn out the lights and pretend to be asleep. Once, last week, I woke to the sound of water where there was no water to be. I got out of bed and followed it to the kitchen, where the kettle was shaking on the stove, though no one had lit the burner. The window was open a hand's breadth. A draft had come in. Curious. On the counter lay the velvet pouch, empty. The chain curled beside it like a gold worm after rain. For a moment, my heart stuttered with a childish superstition. It was coming back together, hair and vow and all. But no. The river had kept what I had given it. The paper was still sleeping under a stone. Only the vessel remained, and vessels are only what we pour into them. I took the chain and, with my husband's pliers, braided it into itself twice, then 3 times, until it was not a necklace at all, but a small gold knot that would not lie flat. I set it in the bowl with the keys. It vanished almost immediately into the heap. That is what I wanted. For the familiar to swallow the sacred until there was no difference between them. My husband came in, rubbed sleep from his eyes, and kissed my hair. "You were up early," he said. "The clock ticked once. I thought I dreamed it." "Perhaps you did," I said. Dreams are also containers. They keep what waking life cannot hold without spilling. The appointment card for my checkup sits under a magnet shaped like a pear on the refrigerator. Tuesday, 10 o'clock. My handwriting looks like my mother's did near the end, each letter negotiated, not assumed. I am not afraid. I have been the one left. I have been the one staying. I know both languages. I know the weight of a chain and the weight of a promise. They are not the same. When I finish this page, I will take the photograph back out of the clock and look at the 4 women again. I will try to see not their sorrow, but the muscle of their decision. The way their mouths hold the words, we keep each other as if those words had teeth. I will name them, even if the paper does not. Anna, Marta, Elle, Elise. I will get some wrong. They will forgive me. The river forgives the stones it cannot remember. If you are here still, breathe on this telling like a person warms glass in winter, and leave a whisper behind. Subscribe, comment, lift a finger, so when my daughter reads this, one day she will see the soft constellation of strangers who said, "We heard." And later, when the children nap, I will take the bowl down and spread the keys on a cloth, newly polished. The iron one that opens nothing. The slim one that opened a pendant in a century. The stubby one with a turquoise bead, souvenir of a door we never owned. I will sort them by the sound they make when they touch. Bright, dull, stubborn, surprised. I will close my eyes and pick one and then another, and hold them together like a cord, and listen for the house to answer. It usually does, not with language, but with a small shift, the ascent of wood to the bodies that have leaned on it. There are so many bodies. There are so many rooms. There is time yet to walk from one to the next, naming what has been kept and what must be there. I sat that evening in the chair by the window, the one that creaks in its joints like a loyal dog, and I let the dusk gather around me. The city outside had softened into amber squares of light, windows breathing out stories I would never know. I held one of the keys from the bowl, the iron one, heavy and rough, its teeth blunted by years of fitting and unfitting locks, and I turned it in my palm until the edges imprinted a faint map into my skin. I thought of how many hands had done the same. I thought of the women in the photograph, how their hands had been empty, but held as if gripping invisible tools. Perhaps this key had been theirs once. Perhaps the pendant had never been meant to travel alone, but always with its companions, keys, mirrors, clocks, each an instrument of remembering. I remembered my mother's voice, not as it had been at the end, frayed and wandering, but as it had sounded when I was small, and she told me fairy tales by lamplight. She would weave the old stories, girls, lost in forests, breadcrumbs scattered, beasts tamed not by swords, but by persistence. Always persistence. And now I see she was passing something even then, that the world does not hand us safety, but it can hand us tasks. Carry this. Watch that. Speak when you are not supposed to. Stay awake when others sleep. It was her way of saying, we keep each other, long before I ever read the words scratched in a stranger's hand. When my granddaughter woke from her nap, her cheeks flushed with the soft roses of sleep, she found me with the keys scattered across the cloth. She laughed, a delighted sound, and lay down among them as though they were coins spilled from a pirate chest. Her tiny hand closed around the gold knot of chain I had twisted from the necklace, and she held it up proudly. Treasure, she said, and I nodded. Yes, treasure, but treasure you cannot buy and cannot spend. She tucked it into her pocket as naturally as if it had always been meant for her. I did not stop her. For the first time, I did not feel fear when the chain passed into another's hand. Later that night, after the children had gone, I dreamed of the river. It was not the wild river of drowning, nor the tame city stream. It was a river made of voices, layered and flowing, carrying with them laughter, warning, lullabies, and cries swallowed too quickly. I stepped into it, and the water did not chill me. It rose warm to my knees, then my waist. When I looked down, I saw not my own reflection, but the faces of the women before me, my mother, her sister, the great-grandmother with her tight bun, the unknown Elle with her unsentenced sorrow. They did not speak, but they did not need to. The current carried their promise into me, and I woke with the taste of river water on my lips. I rose before dawn and wrote their names, real names, guesses, fragments on scraps of paper. I placed each scrap into the empty pendant case, then closed it tight. It felt right that the oval should hold not a single lock of hair, but a chorus. I placed it back into the bowl of keys, no longer hidden, no longer disguised as an object of dread. When the children come, they will see it there among the others, not apart, but belonging. They will ask, and I will tell them. And when they are older, they will decide whether to carry it or to keep it only a story. That choice will be theirs, not dictated by fear. My husband stirred in his sleep and murmured my name. I returned to bed, pressing my body against his bent back, feeling the slow rhythm of his breath. He has carried me through so many of my hauntings without asking what they were. He will likely never know the full shape of the vow our family bore. But his presence is its own form of keeping. He kept me when I faltered, kept the house steady when my hands shook, kept the silence from becoming too sharp. We keep each other in more ways than one. Do you still hear me? If you do, let me know with a quiet trace, the way one sets a candle in the window for the traveler unsure of the road. Even a small light says, you are not alone. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice something new. The clock, though still stubborn, gave a single tick each morning as I walked past. Not a rhythm, not a return to service, just one solitary beat, as if agreeing to bear witness alongside me. The mirror, too, seemed to soften. Its cracks no longer split my face, but braided it together, as though it wanted me to see the wholeness that had always survived beneath the fractures. And the keys, when jostled by children's hands, no longer sounded like a storm, but like bells ringing in layered harmony. I began to write more often, not only this confession, but letters to women I knew, neighbors, cousins, even those I had quarreled with long ago. I wrote not to reopen wounds, but to say, I remember you, and I will not let forgetting be the last word. Some wrote back, shy but grateful. Some did not. That too is part of keeping, offering without insisting. As spring unfolded, the plum tree in the neighbor's yard bloomed once more, blossoms trembling like pale moths. I stood at the window watching as petals fell, remembering the boy who broke his arm there, the girl he later held close, the laughter that had sounded like bells and then had been taken by silence. Life goes on, indifferent and insistent. The blossoms fall each year whether we are ready or not, but I see them differently now, not only as a sign of fragility, but as proof of recurrence. What breaks comes again. What falls returns in a new form. I do not know how many more years I have, nor how many more pages my hands can press into being, but I know this. The pendant no longer owns me. It is part of me, yes, but only as scars are part of skin. What owns me now are the faces of those who will come after, and the words etched behind the mirror, the words that refuse to die. We keep each other. And when I go, I hope the house will still tick once each dawn, that the bowl will still sing when fingers stir its keys, and that someone, my daughter, my granddaughter, or even you, who sit in the half-light reading these words, will remember that witness is not curse, but covenant. If you are here, stay with me a little longer. Leave a word, leave a sign. For stories like mine survive only when someone chooses not to look away. Tuesday came in on the quiet feet of mist, the kind that gathers in corners and waits to be noticed. I dressed slowly, the way a person does when the air around their skin feels newly tender, and pinned my hair back with the old tortoiseshell comb that has learned the shape of my scalp. The appointment card under the pear magnet had curled at one corner. I smoothed it with my thumb and felt the fine grit of the refrigerator paint under the paper, like sand clinging to a shell. My husband offered to come, but I told him no. Some corridors you walk alone, not because you must, but because you want the footprints to be only yours. The clinic smelled of antiseptic, and coffee nerves always leave the taste of coffee in waiting rooms. A television murmured a program about weather in places I will never see. Headlines scrolled past without asking me to understand them. A woman in a yellow scarf sat across from me, both hands folded around her phone like a small prayer book. There was a fading mark on the soft inside of her forearm, a bloom that had forgotten its original color. She caught me noticing and tucked her arm under her shawl, not quite fast enough. The old reflex rose in me, look away, to be polite, but the words behind the mirror, the ones carved in my hand's uneven temper, wouldn't let me. I lifted my eyes and held hers. I did not ask. I did not tell. I only nodded, slowly, as if to say, I see you, and I see what you might be forced to carry. Something in her shoulders let go. A single invisible thread snipped. She nodded back. That was all. Sometimes witness is no more than the steady meeting of two gazes, while a television, ignorant, speaks of rain. When the nurse called my name, the sound entered me like a key in a familiar lock. The corridor walls were the color of polite eggshells, the color of waiting. Tests, measurements, a machine breathing its soft mechanical breath while I held still and imagined the river rolling under bridges, patient as a fact. The doctor was kind, the kind that comes from practice more than temperament, but kindness is a tool, and I did not scorn it. He spoke in the measured way of those who have learned that words can tilt a life. A shadow here, he said, a watchfulness recommended, a new medicine, nothing that must be feared if it is carried carefully. I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it felt like a translation of an old language I already knew. By muscle, carry it carefully, and it may not cut you. He wrote numbers on a card, figures that would have anchored someone else, then placed his palm briefly on the back of my hand. We all touch wood in our own ways. Outside, the street had decided to be bright. Children in coats like small moving flags tugged their adults toward the promise of pastries. A woman argued with a parking meter and won. I walked home slowly, letting the city's little frictions polish me back into myself. At the corner, a shop window held a clock I had never noticed before. A grand thing with a face the color of tea and hands like simple bones. It ticked. I stood watching until my reflection in its glass lined up with the hour hand, and I felt an absurd surge of companionship. I pressed my palm to the cold pane. My pulse answered its measured insistence. My heart and the clock two horses that had agreed, for now, on a pace. At home, the first thing I did was take down the bowl. The keys slid into my lap with their familiar clatter. One struck the gold knot and made a sound like a small bell tucked under wool. I sorted them by weight, by softness of edge, by the way they had learned my hand over the years. The needle key lay where the children had left it, tucked under the edge of a coaster stamped with a blue ship. I held it up and remembered the pendant's mouth opening, the letters, cramped confession to a vow. I remembered the river taking hair the way the lungs take air without malice, obedient to its nature. I thought of the women with whom I had broken bread, of the way their stories had woven a net that did not rescue, but refused to let anyone disappear without a name. I wrote my daughter a note. Not a letter of the past, not this long unraveling confession, but a simple note folded into a pocket. I would like to walk with you to the river tomorrow. Bring nothing but your hands. She arrived before noon, carrying soup in a jar because a person cannot approach water empty-handed. We took the long way, past the grocer who still packs brown bags as if each onion had a biography, past the barber shop where the soft hair of men fell and lay like gray snow. The air felt thin, like fabric worn smooth. At the bank, the water did not glitter. It listened. We stood where my shadow fell into it like a dark ladder. I took the empty pendant from my coat and opened it once more, not out of habit, but to show her the hollow. She touched the rim with one fingertip. "So this is what you kept," she said, and there was no accusation in it, only inventory. "This is what I carried until I learned to carry without it," I said. "And even then, sometimes I miss the weight." She nodded and reached into her pocket. When her hand came out, it held a small curl of hair the color of wheat crust, the clippings from her youngest's first trim, caught and kept in a folded square of tracing paper. She met my eyes. "Not for the pendant," she said, "for the river, for remembering that beginnings are as holy as endings." We knelt and sent that pale comma out onto the current. It turned once, twice, then composed itself and floated away. My daughter began to speak, not a speech, but a series of words placed carefully between the two of us, like stones laid to reach the other side. fear, leaving, forgiveness, return. She did not tell me everything. No one owes the river the whole of their grief. The ducks watched us, greedy and uncomprehending. I smiled at their bright, rustling impatience and loved them for their simple hunger. On the way back, we passed the mirror shop. The front display was a ridiculous fantasia mirrors, shaped like suns, like moons, one rimmed with shells that had never known our latitude. I caught my face in a dozen surfaces, and in each I looked slightly altered. Kindness tugged higher in one. Severity settled heavier in another. Imagine, my daughter said, if we could choose which version to give the world each morning. I told her we do, in ways no glass can catalog. She looped her arm through mine and squeezed. That simple pressure, the language of bone and blood, carried me from one square of sunlight to the next. At home, I made tea and brought out the photograph from the clock. The edges had furred a little more since the last time. Paper learning, the genius of decay. We looked at the 4 faces again. I spoke the names I had given them, wrong and right together, and my daughter spoke new ones, names of women I do not know, women from her own intervals of life. We set the picture under the long crack of the wall clock's glass and watched the way the fracture cast a pale seam across their dresses. It made them look as if they were sewn together. Perhaps they were. Perhaps that is the whole of it. We sew each other into place with the only thread we have, attention, and call it love, because love is the word that offends the least. When she left, evening had already leaned its forehead against the window. I tidied with the reverence I reserve for the hour between visits and night, restoring small normalcies, cups into the sink, spoon into its jar, coaster back under the bloom-scarred glass. The keys went back into their bowl, a small brass sea tamed by a porcelain sky. The absence of the pendant had become finally a presence I could live with. It was astonishing how much breath that absence allowed. Later, the house did what houses do when they are old and have been well used. It sang, not loudly. A hinge cleared its throat. A stair answered in its slow dialect. The radiator tapped a message that promised warmth soon. I lay on my back and looked at the ceiling where hairline cracks had pursued their own cartography, a map of an archipelago of islands that never touch. I found the old consolations, the familiar stain shaped like a moth, the shadow of the window frame moving toward the wardrobe, and let them link themselves into a chain that remembered me without weighing me down. Near midnight, rain began, thin and sure. The clock in the hall, oh, stubborn clock, shuddered its pendulum once, then twice, and let go of another single tick. I felt it in my chest like a fingertip tapping a door. I sat up, almost laughing, and went to it. The hands had somehow crept to 2:14 again, the old accident of alignment. I put my fingertip on the glass just there and held it until the warmth of me made a small oval of fog, the way a life leaves its tenderness behind on the things it touches. I thought of my great-grandmother, of the water folding around her, of the way grief dresses itself in whatever it can find and calls it fate. I thought of my mother's words, thinning and brightening like an old shirt held to the sun. I thought of the woman with the yellow scarf in the waiting room, her nod that had cost her something and given her something back. I whispered the line behind the bathroom mirror and felt the house tilt its old ear toward me. We keep each other. The words no longer felt like duty. They felt like air. Before I returned to bed, I opened the window, just a hand's breadth. The rain breathed in, cool and clean. The room smells. Tea, linen, the faint metallic tang of keys, shifted and made space for the weather. I stood a long time with my palm flat on the sill, the wood dampening under my skin, and felt everything I have carried rearrange itself kindly. Not light in kindness is not lightness, but settle in ways my bones could bear. I thought of the gold knot tucked in the bowl. I imagined a future hand lifting it up and asking what it had been, and being told a story that was gentle and true. Once we believed an object could carry our sorrow for us, but then we learned to carry it together. Sleep came then, without knocking. I dreamed again of rivers, but this time they were narrow and made of light, and they ran through rooms I have known, the kitchen, the hall, the small bedroom where my daughter slept after thunderstorms. Each room held its own clock face, and each face was mirrored by an eye mine, my mother's, my granddaughter's, so that time and witness were partners at last, not enemies pressing opposing palms. Somewhere a door opened with a key I did not recognize, and a soft wind pushed through, riffling a stack of papers I have not yet written. Morning announced itself with the smell of toast and the brief clamor of crows staging their argument on the chimney. My husband was already up, his back a landscape I could read without looking. On the table he had set a small plate with one plum, wrinkled at the skin, sweetness condensed by keeping. I ate it standing up, and the flesh shocked me with its summer memory. I laughed, alone, quietly. It felt like someone had returned a borrowed thing without telling me. I could end here, with the taste of fruit, and the rain gentle to a quiet tapping, and the old clock holding its single tick in its wooden mouth like a coin. But endings are only places where we anchor our breath before the next intake. Today I will write 2 more notes. One to the woman in the yellow scarf, care of the clinic where the waiting room keeps its coffee smell, with nothing inside but my name and the line I have given every mirror in this house. The other to my granddaughter, tucked into the pocket of her coat where her fingers like to hide, telling her that treasure can be heavy and still be worth holding, and that the best treasures are the ones that let us set them down when our hands are needed elsewhere. And then I will make soup. I will polish the bowl and let the keys sing a little as they settle. I will wind the clock with no expectation beyond the comfort of the gesture. I will look into the mirror above the sink and wash my face in its patience. I will step to the window and smell the wet street, the iron of rails, the yeast of a bakery waking up. And if you are still with me in this ordinary morning, if my voice has kept you company as your own house learns your steps, leave me a sign as small as your fingertip. Subscribe quietly, set a word down, press like the way one presses a seed into soil, so the next woman who bends to lift this story will know she is not lifting alone.